Subscribe, like this video, leave your comments below. Buckle up. This story is about to launch you into an abyss of intrigue and vengeance. Hold on. Before this flight takes off into uncharted territory of betrayals and revelations, make sure to subscribe to our channel, give this video a huge like, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single twist of fate. And now prepare yourselves, because what you're about to read isn't just a simple journey. It's a ticking time bomb, the flight of truth. From London to Paris, the champagne flutes clinked softly in first class, muffled by the plush leather seats and an air of self-satisfaction. Mr. Alistair Finch leaned back, his tanned wrist resting on the edge of his tray table. The custom-made watch on his wrist gleamed under the cabin's soft light, subtle, intentional, like everything he did. Across from him, Ms. Bethany Clark laughed a little too loudly at a joke he'd barely told. She was dazzling. Bare shoulders, an emerald necklace he'd given her just hours ago, and the glow of someone who truly believed she had won. "Did you really tell your partners you were retiring?" she asked, swirling her champagne. He smiled, his eyes tracing the line of her collarbone. "They work for me. They'll adapt." Bethany smiled and reached for his hand. Everything felt meticulously orchestrated. The vintage champagne, the upgraded suite in Paris, the whispers among the flight attendants who recognized his face from magazine covers, and Britain's richest men lists. Even the clouds beyond the window seemed to part just for him. If this story is gripping you, subscribe to the channel, hit like, share, and tell us where you're reading from. Power was his oxygen, and today the air was thick with it. A flight attendant approached with a charming smile. "Mr. Finch, we'll be pushing back shortly. Do you need anything else?" "Another round of champagne, please," he said smoothly. "And bring something sweet for my fiancée. She's celebrating her promotion to future Mrs. Finch." Bethany blushed. The attendant smiled politely, nodded, and walked away, only to return moments later, a forced smile and a tray of champagne in hand. He leaned in closer this time, discreetly, as if sharing a VIP detail, but his words didn't match the warmth of his smile. "Sir," he said with two babies. The glass slipped. It didn't break, but the sound of its fall, Bethany's gasp, Alistair's slow tilt of the shoulders as he turned to the flight attendant, cut the air like a knife. "What?" Alistair's voice was low, almost inaudible. The flight attendant backed away, his face neutral now. She asked not to be disturbed. Bethany blinked. "Wait! What is he talking about?" Alistair didn't answer. His mind raced, searching for options. Could it be someone else? A bluff? But he knew. Deep down, he knew. Elara. She had found him. The plane hadn't even left the tarmac. He looked towards the cabin curtain, towards the back of the plane. Bethany leaned in. "Alistair, is this an ex-girlfriend?" Oh, he didn't move. His hand gripped the armrest, knuckles white. This wasn't part of the script. He had taken every precaution. Private investigators, encrypted accounts, non-disclosure agreements with staff. Elara wasn't supposed to know about this flight, let alone appear on it. And the babies? The babies? Who is she? He turned to her. Finally. His jaw tightened, his expression shifting from charming to cornered. She's no one. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Behind him, the cabin door closed. The aircraft hummed softly. The captain's voice welcomed passengers. Flight attendants began final checks. The outside world began to shrink to metal, pressurized air, and consequences. Bethany withdrew her hand, and Alistair Finch, once untouchable, stood motionless, realizing something horrifying. He would spend the next 3 hours trapped in the sky, with the woman he had left behind, and 2 daughters he'd ever dared to know. Ilara Vance tightened her grip on the stroller as the boarding gate came into view. She hadn't slept more than 3 hours in the last week, and the bags under her eyes were no longer subtle. Her blouse was wrinkled, her curls pulled back into a quick bun, and she smelled faintly of baby powder and formula. But her gaze was steady, unwavering. The twins cooed softly in their carriers, 2 identical girls, barely 9 months old. One was drifting off to sleep. The other blinked at the fluorescent lights above them, oblivious to the revenge their mother was about to orchestrate. The airline had offered her help. A gate agent noticed her carrying both girls and offered her priority boarding. Ilara declined. She didn't want attention. Not yet. She wanted Alistair to see her when it was already too late. She moved down the jet bridge with cautious steps. Her palms were damp, but not from fear. Anticipation had a way of mimicking nerves. As she boarded the plane, a flight attendant greeted her. "Welcome aboard." Ilara nodded and kept walking, her eyes briefly grazing the first-class curtain, but not stopping. He was there. She felt him, like a cold pulse beneath the luxury. Her seat was in economy. Row 22, by the window. She didn't ask for an upgrade. She didn't need it. She was there for positioning, for the moment, for the story she was about to write. As she settled in, passengers moved around her, annoyed and oblivious. The woman next to her offered a polite smile before plugging in her headphones. Ilara pulled out a small bag, preparing bottles. Every movement rehearsed. Mechanical, automatic. She didn't need to check if the news had spread. It would. She had sent the anonymous tip to the tabloids 10 minutes before boarding. Billionaire Alistair Finch boards flight 417 to Paris, with his mistress in first class. Wife and children, also on board. Let the world chew on that. She had tracked his emails for months, paid a tech friend in exchange for silence. Discreetly followed bank transfers, private jet bookings, hotel reservations. She didn't want revenge. She wanted proof. And now she had it all. Boarding passes, legal documents, a signed confession he didn't realize he gave in the form of a voicemail. But most of all, she had presence. He couldn't erase her if she was 10 rows away. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated. A voice over the intercom. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." Ilara cradled the girls against her chest. The engines began to roar beneath them. She didn't flinch. As the plane lifted, so did something else. Her silence, her fear, her marriage. All left on the tarmac. One of the girls whimpered. Ilara whispered softly, "Shh, baby. He's going to hear you." She looked out the window, not at the clouds, but at the distance she was building between the woman she had been and the one who bought a ticket to war. Further ahead, beyond the curtain, Alistair Finch was probably still sitting complacently in first class, perhaps drinking champagne again, perhaps pretending to be single. He had no idea this flight, this sky, belonged to her now. The engines roared louder, the altitude increased, and Ilara Vance closed her eyes briefly and smiled. This wasn't turbulence. It was momentum. The seatbelt sign clicked off. Flight attendants floated down the aisles with trays of hot towels and sugared almonds. Bethany uncrossed her legs, stretching slightly. He didn't react. She reached for her champagne glass, but her eyes remained fixed on him. He was texting, annoyed, focused, not on her. The screen flashed briefly before he angled it, deliberately. She only caught a name. Ilara. Her stomach clenched. Bethany blinked once, letting her smile settle back, like makeup she didn't remember applying. She leaned in closer, feigning curiosity. Already working? She teased, her voice sugary, soft. Alistair didn't look up. Just something urgent. She nodded, but her mind twisted. Ilara. He had said that name before. My wife is cold, calculating. She controls everything. You're the first person who truly sees me. Bethany remembered how his voice had sounded the first time he said it. Soft, broken. The kind of vulnerable honesty that made her feel like the center of his gravity. Now, 30,000 feet up, she realized something horrifying. That voice was an act. Here, a small pause. Do you think Bethany suspected anything before this moment? Tell us in the comments. Flashback. 2 years ago. Art gallery. London. A charity fundraiser she'd been hired to model for. Alistair Finch had watched her from across the room. He approached with subtle confidence. No cheesy lines. Just curiosity. Respectful. Intelligent. Interested. You don't belong here, he'd said. Neither do you, she'd replied. He laughed. He bought 2 paintings he didn't care about. One of them, she realized later, was of a faceless woman in a birdcage. He asked her out that night. By the end of the month, she was in his penthouse, wrapped in cashmere sheets and half-truths. Back in the present, Bethany swallowed and looked around the cabin. First class felt different now. The hum of the engines couldn't drown out the hum inside her skull. The air tasted colder. Alistair finally put his phone away. He turned to her. Smiled. I've been thinking, he said. Once we land in Paris, maybe we extend the trip. Rome or Santorini. Her mouth moved before her mind caught up. That sounds incredible. But her voice didn't match her eyes, because she was seeing him now, clearly. How he used charm as armor. How every romantic gesture had a purpose. How he never answered direct questions. How his past, when pressed, was always just out of reach. She remembered asking him once about his children. He'd dismissed it. Let's not ruin the night. Bethany had assumed it was an estrangement, not an abandonment. Now she wondered, how many other Bethanies had there been? More importantly, how many after? She leaned back in her seat, but the comfort was gone. Her champagne glass remained untouched. Alistair had already moved on, browsing the in-flight wine list as if nothing had changed. She watched his hands, so steady, so practiced, like a magician setting up his next trick. A question crept up her chest and lodged there, heavy. Was I ever real to him? And worse, did he ever intend to leave her? From somewhere deeper in the plane. A baby cried. Bethany turned her head. She hadn't seen the woman. Not yet. But she felt her. The presence moving up the aisle from behind the curtain. Inescapable. Inevitable. The wife. The babies. The reckoning. Bethany looked out the window at the infinite white. She no longer felt like she was flying. She felt like she was falling. The first cry came just after the flight attendants began dinner service. Sharp, sudden, piercing the engine's hum like a needle tearing silk. Bethany flinched. Alistair froze. It wasn't the cry itself that unsettled him. It was the buried recognition within it. That sharp, piercing tone had something eerily familiar, something bound by blood. He didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Bethany looked towards the curtain separating first class from economy. You hear that? Alistair didn't answer. Another wail followed, this one angrier. Then came the soft coos of the second child, almost in harmony. Twin cries, out of sync, but inescapably linked. Bethany narrowed her eyes. Wait, there are 2 babies. Alistair's jaw tightened. He took a slow, deep breath and reached for his wine. The glass was empty. His hands weren't steady enough to pour another. She leaned into him. "You said she wouldn't come." He didn't move. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Because the moment had arrived, and he wasn't ready. Time for reflection. If you were Alistair, how would you react to this unexpected turn of events? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Flashback. The memory hit like a wave. Ilara, sitting in his penthouse kitchen. 8 months pregnant. One hand on her swollen belly, the other resting on a folder labeled prenatal expenses. "I need access to the joint account," she'd said. Her voice trembled. He hadn't looked up from his tablet. "You're not working right now. I'm covering everything. You're controlling everything." That made him look up. Don't turn this into a power play. Her eyes gleamed, not with tears, but with an understanding. It was no longer a partnership. It was ownership. He had already begun to rewrite the narrative. Ilara was unstable, hormonal, too emotional to be trusted with decisions. He remembered thinking how quiet she had become after that night. He hadn't minded the silence. Back on the plane, the silence broke again. A toddler shrieked, then another cry. A nearby passenger groaned. Bethany pulled her blanket tighter. She suddenly felt cold. "Are they yours?" The question dropped like a slap. Alistair didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned towards the aisle. His hand gripped the armrest as if it were a ledge. Somewhere in row 14B, Ilara was rocking her daughters. He hadn't seen them since the NICU. He had never held them. He had never wanted to. His plan had always been simple. Pay Ilara off. Stay distant. Rebuild his public image with someone new. Bethany was supposed to be the pivot, the clean slate. But now, everyone would know. The passenger across the aisle angled their phone, pretending to check messages. But the camera clearly pointed at him. The red recording light glowed. A couple in the row behind whispered, "That's Alistair Finch, isn't it? The CEO? He's with that influencer. But didn't his wife just have twins?" More phones went up. Alistair stared straight ahead, face stone, trying to silence the fire behind his eyes. His reputation wasn't crumbling behind closed doors. It was going viral at 36,000 feet. He grabbed his phone and typed a message, thumbs trembling. "Land, now! Damage control!" No signal, no escape. Bethany leaned closer, her voice lower now, anger dissolving into fear. "She brought them on purpose, didn't she?" Alistair looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't lie. "Yes." Bethany looked away, her lips parted as if to say something more. But what was left? She had believed she was the center of his world. Now she saw she was just a shield. And the wife? The babies? They hadn't just returned. They were boarding every conversation, every whisper, every headline from now on. Back in row 14B, Ilara gently rocked her daughters. One was asleep now. The other sucked her pacifier, cheeks damp with tears. A man in the aisle next to her leaned in. "Rough flight, huh?" Ilara didn't smile. She looked ahead, towards first class, towards the man who had left them all behind. "No," she whispered. "This is just starting to get good." The seatbelt sign illuminated again. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice buzzed over the intercom. "Moderate turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." But the turbulence had already arrived in first class. If you're enjoying this story full of twists, like and share it. Your support helps us continue telling incredible tales. Alistair Finch hadn't moved in 15 minutes. He was rigid, eyes fixed straight ahead, jaw clenched. His wine glass remained full. His phone buzzed again. Ignored. His walls were crumbling, and someone else was telling the story. In row 14B, Ilara tapped once more. "If you ruin me, I'll ruin you back." Bethany blinked. Ilara smiled softly. "And yet, here I am." She turned off the recorder. A flight attendant approached. "Would you like a meal, sir?" Ilara looked at her daughters. "No," she said calmly. "I already have everything I need." The attendant nodded and moved on. Bethany stood to leave. Before she did, she looked at Ilara one last time. "You're not what he said you were." Ilara shrugged. "He never knew me to begin with." Bethany disappeared down the aisle, past rows of strangers. But her mind stayed with the voice that had haunted the recordings, and the woman who turned them into her armor. Alistair had built an empire. But Ilara? Ilara had built a case. The turbulence hit like a warning shot. A sharp jolt. Trays rattled. Overhead compartments groaned. A few surprised gasps echoed through the cabin. Alistair gripped the armrests, knuckles white. The moment passed in seconds, but the pressure in his chest didn't subside. Something was crumbling. Not outside the plane, but inside him. He turned his head. Bethany had returned. Quiet. Distant. She sat beside him now, arms crossed, eyes straight ahead. Not touching him. Not looking at him. He was used to attention. Now he felt abandonment. From everywhere. Then he saw her. Ilara. She stood near the front of economy class, swaying with the plane's movement. Both girls secured to her chest in a wrap. Her posture was calm, confident. She didn't need to speak. She just needed to move. She approached the galley, where the lead flight attendant was preparing the next drink cart. Alistair watched from behind the first-class curtain, the edge of her silhouette visible. Ilara spoke in a low voice. The flight attendant froze, then took something from her hands, a white envelope. Sealed, labeled in black ink, to be delivered mid-flight. Confidential legal service. The attendant hesitated, eyes wide. Ilara nodded. A moment later, the attendant pushed through the first-class curtain, walked directly to Alistair's seat and said, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Mr. Finch, this is for you. You have been formally served." He handed him the envelope and turned away without waiting for a response. Whispers spread like wildfire. A woman, too, stood and gasped. A man across the aisle raised his phone, but quickly lowered it when Bethany glared at him. Alistair didn't move. He stared at the envelope in his hands. Custody papers, divorce documents, signatures already in place, jurisdiction, international. Filed the moment the wheels left the ground. He was literally above the law, unable to avoid, postpone, or escape it. Bethany moved beside him, her voice whispering but sharp. "She served you, Alistair?" Alistair said nothing. She leaned closer. "Do you know how planned that is? Do you know how much she had to know about you, about your flight, about your schedule, for this moment to happen?" Still, he didn't speak, because she was right, because Ilara wasn't reacting. She was executing, and he was trapped. "Open it," Bethany said. "Be a man and read it." Slowly he peeled back the flap. 6 neatly stapled pages. Legal text. Emotionless. Line after line of things he once controlled, now slipping from his grasp. Exclusive custody. Frozen assets. Request for 9 months of retroactive child support. Restraining order clause upon landing. The last line stung the most. Because silence does not equal safety. The words blurred. He blinked hard and looked up. Bethany was no longer looking at him. She was looking at Alara, who had returned to her seat in economy class, both daughters asleep, quiet as if she hadn't just dropped a bomb mid-flight. The turbulence hit again, harder this time. The plane shuddered. A plastic cup slid from a tray and rolled down the aisle. Bethany stood. "I'm moving." Alistair looked at her. "Where?" "Anywhere away from you." She disappeared through the curtain. Again. This time, Alistair didn't stop her. He stared at the legal packet on his lap. For once, no words came. No plan. No call to make. Just altitude and descent. Don't let this story stay just in your mind. Like and subscribe for more breathtaking dramas. Alistair looked out the window. The clouds below seemed infinite. Soft, white, forgiving. Everything he wasn't. He clutched the divorce papers. But his attention was no longer on the words. It was on a single line, buried in the footnotes. Legal language. Clinical, but devastating. DNA confirmation attached. Only daughter A. Only one. He quickly scanned the attached medical report. 2 samples. One marked as his biological daughter. The other? It didn't match. He blinked hard once. That had to be a mistake. In row 14B, Alara felt him approach. She didn't turn. Not even when she heard the heavy, halting footsteps. He stopped right beside her row. He stood in the aisle, voice low but strained. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, holding up the documents. She looked up slowly. Calm, resigned. "That," she said, "is the truth." "Which one is mine?" She didn't answer immediately. She gently rocked one of the girls, while the other stirred beside her. He leaned in, whispering and yelling. "You used IVF behind my back. You signed the consent forms. I didn't know there were 2 embryos." "You didn't ask." Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably. Alistair lowered his voice. "So one of them isn't mine." Alara nodded once. "Why?" he asked. "Why on earth would you do that?" Her eyes sharpened. "Because I knew you wouldn't protect the one that was." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. She continued, voice low and firm. "You wanted nothing to do with them. You said so. You disappeared the day I showed you the ultrasound. You said, and I quote, 'One child is an accident. 2 is a trap.'" She adjusted the blanket over the twins. "So I created my own backup plan." Alistair shook his head slowly, his eyes fluttering between the girls. "Which one?" She looked up again, emotionless. "Does it matter?" He swallowed and realized for the first time that he didn't know how to look at them. Not his daughters, not his people, not even their names. Just consequences. "You manipulated science," he whispered. "No," Alara said. "I manipulated the outcome." A pause. "I made sure one would always be safe. Even from you." That hurt more than anything else she had said. "You can't erase me like that." "You already did," she replied. "You just thought I'd stay erased." He looked back at the children, both asleep now, utterly oblivious to the battlefield around them. "You lied. You protected." He backed away, stunned. For a moment he wasn't Alistair Finch the billionaire. He was just a man, with a daughter he couldn't name, and another who never belonged to him. And yet, somehow, both belonged to Alara more than he ever did. He turned without a word. He walked down the aisle like a ghost. Alara exhaled slowly. From the window, the clouds parted. Somewhere in the distance, the captain announced the descent. But the truth had already landed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We have begun our initial descent into Paris." The words echoed like a countdown. Alistair slumped into his seat, the weight of the altitude pressing harder than gravity. The divorce papers still rested on his lap. The DNA result flickered in his mind like a bug he couldn't debug. One daughter his, one not. Neither reachable. He stood abruptly. Passengers looked up, sensing the tension, but unsure whether to speak or pass by. Some began filming again. A billionaire crumbling mid-flight wasn't something you saw every day. He ignored the stares and headed to where Bethany now sat alone. Near the bulkhead, headphones on, but music off. She saw him coming. She didn't flinch. "Bethany," he said, kneeling by her row. "Let me explain." She stared straight ahead. "There's nothing left to explain," she said flatly. "You didn't want." She turned. "Finally." "You didn't want what, Alistair? That you lied. That you abandoned your children. That you dragged me into your second life as if I were a backup plan." He lowered his voice. "I never used you." She snorted. "Yes, you did. You used me to prove to yourself that you still had options." Nearby passengers moved away, giving space but not privacy. Alistair tried once more. "Please, Bethany, don't let it end like this." She took a deep breath. Then she stood. "You ended it the moment you turned your back on a woman holding your daughters." She walked down the aisle, past first class, towards the back of the plane. She didn't look back. She didn't break. He found Alara next. She was sitting in her row, the babies asleep, her face turned towards the window, framed by the fading light. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, gripping the seat in front of her, as if it were the only thing keeping him grounded. "Alara." Nothing. "Alara, please." She adjusted one of the baby blankets. "You win," he murmured. "Okay. You win." At that, she turned her head slightly. Her expression wasn't cruel. It was empty. "Do you think this was about winning?" He leaned closer. "I can do better." She cut him off with a single glance. "You had your chance, Alistair. When they were born. When I begged you for help. When I asked you to show up." She looked back out the window. "And you didn't." He opened his mouth, closed it again. He waited for her to say something more. She didn't, because she didn't have to. He walked away slower this time, back to his seat, back to nothing. The plane began to descend. The city lights of Paris twinkled beneath the clouds. The man who once owned towers, headlines, and rooms full of admirers. Now he was buckled into his seat, alone, no hand to hold, no voice to hear, just silence. And the descent. If you made it this far, congratulations. Now it's your turn. Do you think Alistair Finch deserves this ending? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. The landing of truth. The plane taxied slowly down the runway. The tires thudded rhythmically over the concrete seams. No one spoke. First class had fallen silent. The man who had once filled it with laughter, champagne, and ego was now slumped in his seat, eyes sunken and wordless. Alistair Finch didn't look out the window. He didn't look at the papers on his lap. He didn't look at anyone. He already knew what awaited him on the other side. In row 14B, Alara kissed each of her daughters' foreheads. One stirred softly, snuggling closer to her chest. The other stretched, yawned, and blinked once. Outside the window, floodlights cast pools of white light onto the tarmac. The shadows of cameras and long lenses danced just beyond the terminal glass. The world hadn't waited for Alistair to tell the story. It had come to hear it from Alara. The cabin door hissed and unlocked. A flight attendant stepped forward and opened it to the jet bridge. Sunlight and chaos poured in. A wall of flashes instantly erupted, refracting off the cabin walls. Reporters shouted questions. "Mrs. Vance, how long have you been planning this? Is it true one of the children isn't his? Mr. Finch, do you deny the allegations?" Were you really served, Alistair? Security quickly boarded, ushering the flight crew out first. Bethany slipped in behind them, a scarf covering her face, sunglasses hiding her swollen eyes. She exited silently, sliding through the opposite door reserved for crew. No one noticed. She didn't want recognition. She wanted clarity. And Alistair had given her that. Back at the front of the plane, two men in suits entered. They weren't police. Lawyers. Alistair recognized both. Corporate legal team. Their eyes were tired, voices flat. We need to talk before you say anything outside. He felt himself numbly rising, like a man walking to his own eulogy. One last look at the cabin. No one looked back at him. Not even the woman who had once begged him to see her. Alara slowly rose, careful not to wake the girls. She adjusted the wrap. One baby on her chest, the other nestled in her arm. A flight attendant approached to help. She gently refused. Alara kept walking. Eyes straight ahead. Voice silent. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it glides down a jet bridge with two babies in its arms, head held high, past the man who tried to bury her. A soft cry echoed against the glass. One of the twins stirred. Alara whispered, "We're okay now," and stepped out into the world that was finally listening. Peace after the storm. The wind was softer here. Alara sat on a sun-warmed bench, overlooking a quiet park. Her shoes were off. Bare feet pressed into the grass. The world around her moved slowly now. Strollers, breeze, distant chimes of an ice cream cart. No one looked at her twice, and that was exactly how she liked it. On the blanket in front of her, the twins giggled, passing a teddy bear back and forth as if it held the secrets of the universe. They were almost a year old. They walked with wobbly knees, shrieking with delight at butterflies, fascinated by every leaf they could grasp. Alara smiled silently and leaned back, head tilted to the sky. She had learned something up there, 35,000 feet up, wrapped in pressurized silence and a long-awaited confrontation. Freedom wasn't loud. It didn't come with handcuffs or headlines. It came in soft exits, in quiet strength, in finally choosing herself. Across town, in a glass office lined with books and courage, Bethany slid a folder across a conference table. "She's ready to testify," her sharp voice said with purpose. "And we'll get her out, safely, quietly." Her client, a woman with tired eyes and fresh bruises, nodded. Bethany stood. "You're not alone." Since the flight, she had rebuilt herself one decision at a time. No more brand deals, no more red carpets, no more being someone's ornament. She joined a legal advocacy group fighting for women like Alara. Women buried under wealth, silence, and control. Her desk held no flowers, only files and hard truths. And every day, she remembered the moment she stood up and walked away from Alistair. It hadn't been a rebellion. It had been survival. As for Alistair Finch, his name hadn't trended in months. The board had quietly removed him. Investors fled. Lawsuits piled up. Accounts frozen. Collapsing shares. His face disappeared from magazines and luxury conference stages. He now lived in a rental on the outskirts of the city. Alone. The leather chairs didn't match. His phone barely rang. Silence was his only companion, and it didn't flatter him. He watched as the world moved on. He watched his children grow from a distance he would never be allowed to cross. And worst of all, he finally understood that no empire could protect him from the truth. Back in the park, one of the twins wobbled and climbed onto Alara's lap, sticky with orange juice and curiosity. "Mama," she cooed. Elara wrapped her arms around her daughter and gently rested her chin on the soft crown of her head. "Yes, darling." The little girl pointed to the sky. "Plane." Elara looked up. A jet whispered overhead, barely visible against the bright blue. She watched it pass, a silver arc in motion. And she thought, not of Alistair, nor the courtroom, not even the pain. She thought of the moment she stood in a narrow airplane aisle, surrounded by passengers and possibilities, and finally spoke without saying a word. She had been served pain. She returned with peace, and she never looked back. If this story moved your heart and mind, don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that notification bell. Share this story with anyone you think needs to hear it.